Hi again everyone, it's Jordan. Welcome back to AfroLivity. A lot of us have been convinced and told by supplement industries trying to sell us oil capsules, or people who sell their fancy oils in the shops. You can get this oil, it's heart healthy, or get this oil, it's really great for greasing your bones and joints, and all these other miraculous claims. Well, I'm going to delve into the science and show that most of this stuff is not really true, and in fact may even cause more disease than it could prevent. Consumption of any oil of any form has been shown to increase the amount of plaque formed within your arteries. So atherosclerosis, which is the hallmark for heart disease. The more plaque you have in your arteries, the more likely it is that you will have some kind of serious cardiac event, be it a stroke, heart attack. It's been shown in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, that irrespective of oil intake, so whether it's from something like butter or something like olive oil, over 2 years in a placebo-controlled randomized study, they had two different groups and they took angiograms, so basically looking at the arteries for different groups, and they found that the groups that consumed the most fat and with an increase in polyunsaturated fats, they basically found no difference. There was still an acceleration and progression of the formation of plaques within both groups, and they linked it with 3 different types of fats, and these are known as lauric acid, oleic acid and linoleic acid, and all 3 of these are found very abundantly in all refined oils. So lauric acid is saturated fat, so you'll find it in oils that are mostly saturated, so coconut oil and palm oil are very high in saturated fat. The second type, oleic acid, is a monounsaturated fat, and it's mostly found in olive oil, up to 83%. And finally, we have linoleic acid, which is a polyunsaturated fat, and it's found in pretty much all vegetable oils. So from that point alone, we can see that there's nothing healthy about consuming oils because they contribute to atherosclerosis. Secondly, high-fat meals, irrespective of the type of fat, whether you're going for something that's really saturated in fat like coconut oil, or something like olive oil, which is mostly monounsaturated fat. The problem with these oils is that they impair what is known as endothelial function. Now, all of our blood vessels are lined by a thin layer of cells, and these are known as our endothelial cells. Now, these endothelial cells are critical in allowing our blood vessels to open, and this is known as vasodilation. When we consume an oily meal, this oil actually impairs our endothelium, impairs our endothelial cells from doing their job. Now, endothelial cells, they produce something called nitric oxide, which basically keeps our blood vessels extremely healthy, and it's critical for actually having successful vasodilation. So if we've got something that interferes with this, it means that within the hours after consuming a high-fat meal, we can see very clearly, as illustrated in this study from Colombia, that the amount that our arteries can dilate is significantly impaired. For example, that study that I just mentioned, it reduces the flow-mediated vasodilation by about 32%. To put that into perspective, if we have an artery that is 7% less wide, so its radius is 7% smaller, it can actually decrease the flow of blood and obviously delivery of oxygen by 30%. It decreases the volume of blood flow by 30%. So everything that we can do to keep our arteries as flexible as possible is what we should be aiming for when we consume food. And clearly, consuming oils really does paralyze our arteries and stops our bodies from being able to do what they should. Furthermore, some oils have also been demonstrated to actually increase our LDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol is the number one marker that we use to measure risk for heart disease. So the higher your LDL levels, the higher your risk for heart disease. So things like coconut oil and palm oil, which are very high in saturated fat, they can have an adverse effect on our cholesterol levels. So coconut oil, terrible for your LDL. It doesn't raise it as much as butter, but that's not really saying much. I mean, that's almost like setting up a competition to see who can run 100 meters in a slower time than Usain Bolt. Now, when we consume oil, this results in something called postprandial lipaemia. Postprandial means after eating, and lipaemia basically means an increased presence of lipids or fats within our bloodstream. So essentially, This paper from 2003, it discusses the dangers of having prolonged periods of this lipaemia. It can affect the progression of atherosclerosis in a negative way. It's also been shown that the longer we have these lipoproteins within our bloodstream increases the formation of LDL. So we want to avoid having this postprandial lipaemia, and we can do so by avoiding oils and sticking to whole plant foods, which are naturally low in fats. And once again, in this study from one of the divisions of the American Heart Association, shows that having a high fat meal, irrespective of the type of oil that was used, would result in the promotion of what is known as a coagulation factor. When we get a cut or when we injure ourselves, these help us essentially clot the blood, basically prevent further bleeding. So it's a good thing. However, the production of these factors, funnily enough, is actually stimulated by the consumption of oils. And so what we find is, instead of clotting just happening when we've got an injury, it's now happening in the hours after we consume our food and within our arteries itself. Once we consume these high oil, high fat meals, they impair the speed at which our blood can flow. And these coagulation factors, the coagulation factors are what's behind this. Our blood cells cannot repel each other as well as they could do beforehand. So it's a very serious condition, and people who already have heart problems tend to experience more pain, and so angina, or increase their risk of having a heart attack in those few hours after eating a very fatty meal. The study that I've linked shows an increase in one of the coagulation factors, factor 7A, which is quite important, increases by over 60% just by consuming a high fat meal, and it takes hours to decrease. So if you think of the average person, everybody slathers their salads in oil, fries something in the morning, or has a fried food or some kind of oil in the evening. Now, remember that I said it takes several hours for the negative effects that I've mentioned in this video to be eliminated by your body. So every time that it comes back down to a normal level, we're pounding ourselves again with high fat. It comes down, we hit it up again. And so there's very little respite, probably only for a couple of hours a day when we're actually in bed and we can't eat, that these negative side effects of oil consumption are not harming us. There's a lot of talk about things like olive oil and whatnot being heart healthy, vegetable oils being really good for you. You know, these are studies that compared olive oil to butter or compared it to animal fats, and of course you're going to see some improvement in general when you switch out high animal fat for plant fat, but that's not to say that these things are healthy. On top of that, a lot of vegetable oils on the market have a very high ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fats, and when you have a high ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, it promotes inflammation within your body, which can lead to a whole host of problems. It is argued that on a daily basis, we should aim for a 6:3 ratio of about 4 parts omega-6 to 1 omega-3. To put this into perspective, corn oil, for example, has 46:1 of omega-6 to omega-3, whereas olive oil has 11:1. They damage the amount of omega-3 that our bodies can actually use and uptake, because omega-6 basically competes for the space. And too much omega-6 in the body promotes inflammation, which is implicated in so many chronic diseases that we have today. So I hope you found that video helpful. I tried to keep it short and sweet, but I think it probably got a bit long. There's nothing necessary about consuming oil. There's nothing in them that is particularly useful. They have so many detrimental effects on the heart, particularly what we're told that it's actually good for. And furthermore, as I always say, if you want the healthy fats, because fat is important in our diet, then you get it from the whole food. You know, instead of drinking soybean oil, eat a couple of soybeans or some tofu. Instead of getting flaxseed oil, grind some flax and sprinkle it on your oats. That's the best way to get your fat, some whole plant food sources. Ditch the oils, they're not good for you, and you want to stick to unrefined foods. So yeah, that was that. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like, comment and subscribe. Share it with a friend who's thinking about oil or is not too sure about its effects on the body. And I'll hope to see you in the next video. One love, bless up.